I really am very grateful to you for sharing part of your morning with me, and I'm happy to open the conference with the first presentation. My name is Rebecca Textor. I am the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services Region 1 Suicide Prevention Coordinator in Virginia. And I wanted to talk to you guys at the forum today about trauma-informed classrooms, what a trauma-informed classroom will look like, and what we can do to bolster the resiliency of the students in the classroom in this upcoming year. And back when I was first invited to do this presentation, I thought about the ACEs research, and I thought that my entire program was really going to be focused on that primarily. But addressing the elephant in the room, I recognize now that during this time of the pandemic, I think most of those who are working in the school system, whether they're teaching or whether they're staff or administration, are really thinking about how do we handle the trauma that could come out of dealing with coronavirus, and how is that going to translate in the classroom with our students trying to come back in at least part-time, or also splitting that work at home. So I want to make sure that we address that as well today. So in light of this, I decided to add this piece to the initial presentation, that is. What does COVID-19 mean to us as teachers this summer? Already right away we're thinking about our own personal reactions to it and our families' ways of dealing with it. And we're getting ready to be hit with the disaster response of an entire classroom full of children who have dealt with it and with their families in their own ways over this long spring and summer. So I found this kind of aha moment this summer when I came across the model of an emotional response to disaster. And this is something that SAMHSA had put forth to show individuals the kind of roller coaster that we go on when we have experienced a natural disaster. And so I'm going to plunk COVID-19 into that, and as we look at this roller coaster, we're going to start out with that arrow of where we go from an emotional high way up here to down at the bottom in that deep blue on the slide. Think of that as a distress level. Okay, so where we normally operated pre-disaster, in any form of disaster, is right here in that middle zone usually. That's where we're skating along, getting by, right? And then we had this warning that something was going on in China. And so we dip down a little bit. We start to put up our antennae and think about, what does this mean? Could it mean something for us? Do we need to be on alert? It eases up, we relax a little bit because we're not quite sure if anything's going to affect us yet. And then there is an immediate threat. We've seen the virus enter the United States, and now we are back down again into this level of thinking about our safety and security. So that's when we started having conversations with our children, and I'm sure that you all had to have some kinds of conversations in the classroom before we let school out in March early. And that was a very difficult time because we didn't know as adults what was exactly going on and what to say, and we did the best we could. So the impact was a time that was very difficult for us. At that point, many of us were isolated or in quarantine, and then there were some ups and downs. I don't know about many of you all, but I experienced this roller coaster that you see on the model in pretty much the way it spells out. I felt like I went through this sort of heroic period, When you think about how we react naturally to stress, that one of the responses can be fight. So we put our best foot forward and we're going to fight this and get through the virus quickly and efficiently, and we're helping our neighbors and reaching out to our friends and saying thank you to our first responders in this immediacy. And there was a time where we thought, it felt good to pull together, and it almost became kind of a honeymoon period in the community itself. We would call that a honeymoon or community cohesion. Then time wore on. The virus stayed around for us, and now we move into this kind of a low dip in how we're feeling, how we're dealing with things, where we're feeling a little bit disappointed that, hey, this didn't just go away with our best efforts, the efforts that we normally put forth, and find ourselves getting through the other side quickly and efficiently. So adults are certainly feeling a disillusionment. It becomes a crossroads for us, and for our children, our students that we're concerned about. They are watching every move that we make and our response, and so we are going up and down and up and down. Just know, you guys, I want to keep this very positive and put a positive spin on this. There will be reconstruction period. There will be an end, a new beginning, and healthier times. And that means emotionally healthier times if we work on it and start working on it now. It's almost like the grief process. If you've ever lost a loved one, there are many ups and downs, and sometimes there's an anniversary reaction. So even once we get through this and perhaps be back in school full-time, there might be a time where we start reflecting, or the youth are going to be reflecting on what it was like, and it may bring a sense of sadness along with it. Let's say, for example, down the road, when coronavirus isn't as much of a threat anymore, but say one of your students is really having difficulty dealing with the fact that they have come down with another strain of flu, maybe a way less dangerous strain of flu, for example, but they may have really elevated fears of that illness because they're remembering what it was like during the coronavirus. So just know that these are, there will be hills and valleys in this, but then we will level off again. It may not be the same, but it can be a positive if we're working together. There's a disaster distress helpline. This is not a suicide prevention lifeline number, not a national lifeline in that regard. So it's not like someone who is specifically dealing with suicidal concerns would call this number. This could be any of us. It could be you as a teacher struggling in a classroom with students who are having different responses to coming back to a social environment after being isolated for a period of time, and due to the virus itself. So take note of the disaster helpline here and make use of it. It is also run by the same folks through our government who do the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and this is their model. So the first part to sort of bolstering us, getting us ready to face what school will look like at the end of August, we have to think about what makes us an experience traumatic for any of us. Always think not only of your students in this case, but of yourself as you either walk back physically or virtually into your classroom environment. Any experience that is overwhelming, scary, painful, could be feeling that you are in fear of your life, if you feel your life is threatened, okay? And this could be physical threat or psychological threat to your safety. It could be a sense of feeling incapacitated, out of control, almost frozen, not knowing which way to go because of an event that took place. Youth are often very surprised that they're not able to regulate their emotions sometimes. They don't recognize maybe where this is coming from. And the trauma response we're talking about that you're going to be witnessing, most likely, is a response to the event, to the pandemic itself, for example. It's not the event itself. It's your response to it. That's what trauma would be. We also know that it's not just, say, the effects of the pandemic that we're going to be looking at when we get back into the classroom. We also know that there are adverse childhood experiences that our students may be still experiencing or have had experience with in the past. Things that have been painful for them over time, perhaps, like psychological or physical abuse, really any kind of abuse, as you see on this list here. Neglect, so forms of neglect that you see on the list. they have done in the study, the actual adverse childhood experiences studies, they have also measured the witnessing violence against a female figure in a household as being a traumatic event that can affect the child. Also, if you have someone in the household who is abusing substances, whether it be alcohol or other drugs or combinations of those, that can be a very difficult and traumatic piece of a childhood to deal with. Mental illnesses, if they've had a suicide attempt, or if someone in their household has died by suicide or attempted suicide, brings up risk for more concerns, health concerns, physically and emotionally for the youth as they grow older. Another piece of this could be incarceration of a parent or someone close to them, or also a parent's divorce or separation. So when the study came about, I imagine that most of you at this point have had some sort of course in the ACEs and the studies. They look at this and sort of score how many of these specific 1 through 10s, these specific things have happened in a young person's life. And the more of these that they have had to deal with, the studies have shown the higher risk in developing either a mental health concern, disorder, health problems themselves, chronic illness, and even a shorter overall lifespan. This could even be to, say, substance addiction down the road. If we do not address the adverse childhood experiences also that we may become aware of in the classroom, if we don't address them as a mentor per se, then they may not build the resilience they need to continue developing and having success in the school environment. And that's what we're going to get into today. This is just a quick pyramid view of what adverse childhood experiences looks like, how it builds from the base during their development, from the earliest, from conception all the way up to early death. So we're looking at possible disrupted neurodevelopment if they continue to experience any of those adverse childhood experiences over time and have maybe several stacked up against them. They could be having problems with their social and emotional and even cognitive advancement. They may develop and have, in research, often developed high-risk behaviors, oftentimes as a way to cope with the things that have been left unaddressed in their childhood. And as you see, it rolls to the health problems in the future. Just because you may have adverse childhood experiences stacked against you does not mean that you are automatically set up for super problems or a disrupted lifestyle. It means that you're at higher risk for it, but there are many things we can do to counterbalance it. So you may be asking, well, as a teacher, okay, I'm not going to be able to unravel that entire knot. You may have students in your classroom dealing with COVID-19 fears, and in addition to that, they may be dealing with any number of adverse childhood experiences within their household or at some point in their life, and those are also stacking up against them. And you're thinking, gosh, I'm not a therapist, I'm a teacher. Here are 3 concrete mindsets that I would love for you to think about that can counterbalance those negative effects of trauma from either the natural disaster we're experiencing or ACEs. The first and most important is to have a growth mindset. And I don't just mean a growth mindset for the student, but for you as a teacher as well. Remember that we still learn even from the most difficult students that we may have in our classroom, okay? You are still capable of growth. And if you keep that mindset, you're going to model it. So really trying to believe in the possibility that each and every single one of your students, that they all have the capacity for growth and becoming more responsible and independent with your guidance. That is so key to this. If you think about just a brief example of a young student, let's say a young middle school male who has really struggled. He's maybe small for his age. He's not usually picked for teams and sports. He maybe has some balance or coordination issues and stumbles. He's kind of been labeled the klutz, and so he feels he is the klutz. Well, he grows up, grows strong, coordinated, bigger. He's high school, works through puberty to some degree, and he's a strong young man, but he still labels himself the klutz. And so let's say he doesn't engage in activities that he would probably be fantastic at. The idea here is not to let him stay in that fixed mindset of, I am a klutz and that's all there is to it. Help him understand that you're always growing, always changing, and there's always potential there. And that is just a tiny example. You can see how that could be translated across the board. No one wants to be labeled the bad kid or the kid with the troubles. Keeping a growth mindset will help everyone understand that there's room for movement and success. The action mindset, this is the most exhausting one for the teachers. This is about actively supporting each and every student through the good and bad times. That's a tough one, especially when they're going through the rough times, to maintain the patience. You really have to have a lot of courage, and every one of you has that courage. And I think you have a curiosity about people in general to even be in this vocation, to be curious about what makes people tick. To be curious about how a young person grows. So keep that in mind, your intention every day, what it is that brought you to this profession in the first place. Think about what mentorship takes. It takes flexibility, it takes persistence, and it takes that determination to keep nudging the student forward. Even if it's in the smallest increments, not everyone's going to have the same type of growth patterns. The other piece is an objective mindset, to remember that even in their rough times when they're being just downright rude to you, please try hard not to take what they say or do personally. That's easy for me to say and very hard to do, but taking it to heart and taking it home at night is going to exhaust you, and you won't be able to have the action mindset or the growth mindset if you're stuck with being exhausted because you feel hurt. Okay? If you want to read any more about this, the origins.online.org, you'll see as a reference on the slides. It has some helpful information for you, and it talks a lot more about different mindsets. Students who have unaddressed trauma, so you're most likely, probably, will have students who have various degrees of trauma in your classroom. But unaddressed trauma, if it goes unaddressed over a period of time, a student may be 2.5 more times likely to fail a grade level, and we don't want to see that happen. Scoring lower on standardized testing could become an issue. Having more language development difficulties, being expelled, suspended, in detention more often, and being designated to special education programs with more frequency. So you see there, if it goes unaddressed, it can morph into other issues. So what are the implications of the childhood trauma for you guys, for all of you within the school system? Trauma behaviors, they're complex, but they can be understood and addressed in a school environment. The core of this is going to be positive teacher-student interactions and relationships, and you have to make an investment of more time with a traumatized child. I'm sure you've seen that in the classroom, but it is worthwhile when you do. If you do this work upstream, like our presentation suggests, you will have less exhaustion, less burnout for yourself in the long run. We want to be able to do this on the front end too, because you don't want to have trouble managing an entire classroom of children at a later point. We know that the process of teaching the child too, and one of these points in here that you'll see, we have to establish the relationship and the trust of the students before we can really get any learning done. They have to want to listen to you and want to trust that what you have to say is worth listening to. Why should your whole school be trauma informed? Well, particularly during the virus, I think that's self-explanatory, because I think you're going to have a lot more children who have varying degrees of trauma to deal with. They're more likely to, first of all, children even pre-COVID, they've been more likely to access mental health care services through your school and through primary care as opposed to private clinics. And over 70% of students who do receive that mental health services, they get them in the school usually. It's oftentimes the teachers who notice first that a student might need that extra bit of care and attention. So we know that they're going to succeed more and struggle less from mental health disorders if it's addressed early and they receive the mental health care that they need. Okay, how might trauma surface in your classroom? If you start seeing persistent despair in certain students, outbursts of acts of aggression, particularly changes in students that you haven't witnessed this in before, hostility towards authority figures, their schoolwork starts suffering, they're having trouble with their social relationships now, they may be practicing self-harm as a maladaptive coping mechanism to deal with emotional pain. They may have suicide thoughts or behaviors, and truancy and substance use. So those are some quick lists that you can refer back to. But you'll also notice the flight, fright, or freeze response, this response to immediate stressors in their life. That can play out in a classroom when you least expect it, and it can be really strange when you don't expect it and you think, wow, that's not a reaction I would expect my student to have to a loud noise, for example, a real fear response. Maybe they freeze. Or you'll see it play out in other ways in the classroom. For example, a student who is stressed and their natural fight response is coming forward. They may be seen or misunderstood as somebody who's combatant, somebody who's just non-compliant, not going to listen, disruptive in the classroom. But they're in a constant state of trying to regain control over their situation, especially when they feel like they're being pushed into something. That could be a struggle they've had at home that you know nothing about, but it can often play out in stress moments in your classroom. Flight response. This is when a student might withdraw or try to escape from a situation in order to cope. They disengage, they run away, they're detaching emotionally to stay safe in their minds. This can be misunderstood as uncooperative or resistant. Freezing. This might be that they just don't speak up, they don't want to engage. And this can be misunderstood in the classroom as being passive or completely unmotivated or uninterested. So again, don't take these reactions personally, because think, could it be that's a stressor response? Because if that's where their mindset is right now, there's not much room for learning what you have to say in your lesson plan for the day. Could ACEs or the disaster response be origins of poor behavior in the classroom? It certainly could be. All right, ask yourself that. Could it be attempts to cope or defend themselves against traumatic experiences? They're reacting literally chemically in their brain to stressors in their life. Really, literally, there's only so much room for them to focus. And so if they're focusing on the major stressors and feeling safe and secure, then there's not much room left to really put together, piece together new material that you're giving them. Okay, it keeps us in a hyper-vigilant state when we are under that kind of stress. So it could interfere the process of verbal and nonverbal learning, processing written information, remembering what they've learned, problem solving in a group setting or having empathy for other students. They don't even have room for that if they're extremely traumatized, for example. Organizing, kind of that little file cabinet in your mind, organizing new material becomes tough for them because they've been used to a chaotic environment. This could be at home, could be in another community aspect or community realm in their life. Okay, we know that trauma can have an impact on brain development if it goes unchecked, and it can affect their attachment, their physical health, and their emotional regulation over time. So keep this in mind if you want to read more about that at a later date. Think about the fact that not only their cognitive ability can be affected, but their self-concept, how they feel about themselves, and it can bring a sense of shame and guilt, particularly if they're labeling themselves as bad, or they're feeling like they do not have the ability to get past the initial trauma response. Their behavior control can be suffering. They can become aggressive, which is not a fun place for us to have to handle that aggression. We just have to back up and remember where it could be coming from. It can affect their sleep, their eating patterns, all of that. And even small triggers in a classroom environment can bring up trauma reenactment for them. Okay, trauma. When you think about academics, it can compromise your ability to trust. If they have other individuals that they cannot trust, adults they cannot trust outside of your classroom, it makes it a little bit harder for them to trust what you have to say within the classroom. We've gone over some of the other pieces that they're not able to comprehend or to take in and organize information, and it makes it tough for them to establish their personal sense of self, to become engaged. These are all the skills for success you see on the left-hand side of the slide there that can be counteracted by the trauma. Danger and safety are the core concerns of a traumatized child. And even in the mostly safe places like school, we're going to have an extra whammy this year because you'll have students coming in who aren't concerned about safety measures from the virus, and others who come in who are literally scared to be in the classroom with a mask on. That's going to be really tricky for you to deal with. So I encourage you to read more about trauma stewardship. Positive and protective factors, positive relationships with you guys, your teachers and peers, is going to reduce that adverse experience impact. Okay, your school climate is going to matter, and a lot of it is going to be about smooth transitions between classes, between projects in your environment, helping students understand what's coming next, what to expect from a new schedule this year, for example. Instead of looking at their deficits when you see a student who's been dealing with trauma, make sure you find any, even if it's a tiny strength that you see shining through, mark it, point it out to them, be happy for them, and do a shout out, because it's going to help them, bolster and have a little bit more self-esteem as they're working through this fear. Okay? And avoid that or that re-traumatizing students. Think about whole child wellness, including their environmental concerns. Strengthen their protective systems, because if you do, you will help increase their attachment and belonging in the environment and with their community and school culture. I will say that one of the biggest things that my daughter missed after coming out of Waddell early this year was her jazz recital that they've been working on as a group. Now you see how many different, all three of these layers here listed on the slide. You can see how a jazz class where students have worked together in a community, working through movement, mindfulness, and learning had really bolstered her, and it was a severe disappointment to not have that recital. So you can see there are going to be students still thinking about those losses. Watch for moments when the intensity of a child's response doesn't match the stressor. Okay, when they seem the behavior is just confusing. What could an alarm system gone off for them? Could their fear have moved to the surface? Okay, and remember that response isn't about you, it's about their ability to achieve immediate safety in the face of perceived danger. It might not even be a real danger. This is a list of common triggers to look for. Okay. And you see loneliness on there and loss of control, also sudden change or unpredictability. Those are all going to come out of certainly the pandemic. How to respond, breathe, be calm, model calm, cool, and collected, because if you model it, they'll follow, they'll start to follow. Don't use this opportunity to demand respect or changing the behavior that quickly. It's not, that's not the moment for it. Notice your tone of voice, your personal space, keep your distance a little bit if you need to, and ask for backup from your staff. Here are some brief tips on supporting traumatized students. I'll let you take a look at these later. I want to encourage you to use your educator's network of support, because you should not be the sole point of contact or care for a traumatized student. That's not what you can literally take on all by yourself. This is a few examples of how the school staff can help. Thinking about building relationships with struggling students. These are some quick steps to think about how you can keep calm, cool, and collected with the student, keep things positive, give them mind-body breaks, use restorative practices instead of the old-fashioned zero-tolerance policy. Okay, here are some examples of mind-body breaks that if you're welcome to go through. Even cross-body movement activities, such as touching the opposite knee as you transition between coursework during the day. Believe it or not, that's a brain break that helps them refocus their attention. You can read more about all this on GoNoodle. In summary, I want you to keep those students healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged, considering some of the keys we've had in this slideshow today. And I want you to really think about your teacher self-care. It is critical, particularly this year. And if you have one homework assignment I want to give you, and hold this book all year long for yourself and just pick it up and open it to any page, please read Trauma Stewardship, An Everyday Guide to Caring for Yourself While Caring for Others by Laura Van der Noot Lipsky. This book will help you deal with other people's trauma in a way that's healthy for you. Okay? These are 3 big ouchies. If you see yourself falling into a trap where you're dreaming about the student who's traumatized, you're having trouble concentrating, sleeping, or feeling irritable, you're feeling numb or detached, seek help. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention today, and I really wish you a great school year. Please go back through the slides and take some time with the information. I hope you'll find it useful. Thanks.